there's a way to live where you're neither exhausted from endless doing nor disconnected from retreating into stillness. The ancient Buddhists discovered something profound, that fulfillment doesn't come from choosing between action and rest, but from understanding how they work together as one complete movement. What you're about to hear will show you exactly how to stop burning yourself out while still accomplishing what matters, how to find genuine peace without withdrawing from your life, and how to act from clarity instead of anxiety. This isn't theory. These are teachings that transformed thousands of lives 2,500 years ago and continue working today because they address something fundamental about how human beings actually function. Modern life tells you to keep pushing, keep producing, never stop. Spiritual teaching often tells you to sit still, detach, rise above. Both approaches leave you feeling incomplete because they're missing half the picture. Buddhism discovered the integration, how stillness makes your actions effective, and how right action deepens your peace. Over the next hours, you'll hear authentic Buddhist stories you've likely never encountered before, not the famous ones, repeated everywhere, but powerful teachings from the original texts that reveal exactly how this integration works. You'll understand why you felt stuck between doing too much and doing nothing, and more importantly, you'll learn the way forward. If you'd like, share in the comments where you're listening from today. People are hearing this teaching from everywhere on earth right now. Get comfortable, find a position that lets you truly rest, and let's begin. One day, King Pasenadi of Kosala came to visit the Buddha with a story that had been troubling him. A wealthy householder in the city of Savatthi had just died, and as king, Pasenadi had gone to oversee the transfer of the man's estate to the royal treasury, since he'd died without any heirs. What the king had discovered disturbed him deeply. The man had accumulated 80 million gold coins, a fortune so vast it was almost incomprehensible, even for a king. But when Pasenadi had investigated how this man had lived, he found something that made no sense at all. Despite his enormous wealth, the man had lived like the poorest beggar in the city. His daily meal consisted of broken rice, the cheap, damaged grains that even servants wouldn't eat, mixed into a thin porridge, with a few stale seed cakes on the side. He wore clothes made from the coarsest hemp, so worn and patched that they were falling apart. When he traveled, he rode in a decayed old cart with a roof thatched from dried leaves, the kind of vehicle that looked like it might collapse at any moment. He'd never helped his family, never given to anyone in need, never enjoyed a single comfortable thing, despite having the means to live in absolute luxury. And now he was dead, and all that accumulated wealth, all 80 million gold coins, belonged to the king's treasury, and the man had experienced exactly none of it. King Pasenadi looked at the Buddha and asked, "How is this possible? How can someone accumulate so much and live with so little? What kind of life is it to die surrounded by gold while living like a pauper? The Buddha looked at the king with compassion and said, "This man, in a past life, murdered his own brother's only son to claim an inheritance. That act of violence for the sake of wealth created a pattern in his mind that he couldn't escape, an endless hunger that could never be satisfied. The man could accumulate," the Buddha explained, "but he could never enjoy what he accumulated. He could acquire, but he could never feel that what he had was enough. Each coin only intensified the craving for the next one, and the next, and the next, in an endless cycle that brought no peace, no satisfaction, no rest." The king sat quietly, taking this in. The image stayed with him, a man sitting alone in a room filled with gold, starving. If you're listening to this now, you probably recognize something in that story, even if your life looks nothing like that man's. You might not be hoarding gold coins, but you know the feeling, that sense that something is perpetually out of reach, that if you could just achieve the next thing, or acquire the next thing, or become the next thing, then finally you'd feel okay. This is what the Buddha called the hunger of becoming, not hunger for things themselves, but hunger to be different than what we are, to have accomplished more, to have arrived at some future state where finally we'll be enough. It shows up everywhere in modern life. In your career, it might look like constantly reaching for the next promotion, the next achievement, the next recognition. You get the promotion you've been working toward for 2 years, and there's a brief moment of satisfaction, and then almost immediately, your mind is already looking at the next level up, thinking, once I get there, then I'll really feel secure. In relationships, it can show up as the constant feeling that if you could just meet the right person, or if your current partner could just change in this one specific way, then you'd finally feel loved, seen, understood. But somehow that person never quite materializes, or when they do, after the initial period wears off, you find yourself restless again, looking for something more. Even in spiritual practice, especially in spiritual practice, this pattern appears. Always seeking the next breakthrough, the next level of understanding, the next realization that will finally bring lasting peace. Meditating not to be present in this moment, but to get somewhere else, to become someone more enlightened, more peaceful, more awakened than you are right now. The exhaustion that so many people feel isn't actually from working too hard, though that might be part of it. The real exhaustion comes from never arriving anywhere, from constantly chasing a finish line that moves every single time you get close to it. You finish one project, and there's no rest. Immediately, your mind is on to the next one. You achieve something you've been working toward, and instead of satisfaction, there's just a brief pause before the craving starts up again, pointing towards something else, something more, something better. The Buddha wasn't being metaphorical or poetic. when he taught that this kind of craving is the root of suffering. He was describing exactly what happens in the mind, this constant hunger that can't be satisfied, because satisfaction isn't actually what it's designed to do. The wealthy man in the story had 80 million gold coins. 80 million. If the problem was the amount, if what he needed was just a little more, he would have been fine somewhere around, say, 70 million gold coins, or 50 million, or 10 million. But the amount doesn't matter when the hunger itself is endless. This is the difficult truth that most people spend their whole lives not looking at directly. We're trying to solve an internal problem with external solutions, and it doesn't work. It's never worked. It will never work. Not because there's something wrong with us, but because that's not how craving operates. Craving isn't actually interested in satisfaction. Craving is interested in craving. Its job is to keep generating the next desire, the next goal, the next thing you need to become or acquire before you can finally relax. The tragedy of the wealthy man wasn't that he couldn't enjoy his wealth because of some karmic punishment. The tragedy was that he spent his entire life believing that the next acquisition would be the one that finally brought peace, and he died surrounded by proof that it never would. You can feel this in your own life if you pause and look honestly. Think about something you wanted desperately: a job, a relationship, an achievement, a possession. Remember how much you wanted it, how you thought, once I have that, everything will be different. And then you got it. And for a moment, maybe you felt satisfied. And then what happened? If you're like most people, after a brief period, days, weeks, maybe months, that thing stopped being the answer and became just part of the background of your life. And your mind was already looking ahead again, finding the next thing, generating the next desire, creating the next feeling of, I'll be okay when. This isn't because you're broken or because you're not grateful or because you need to try harder to appreciate what you have. This is how unexamined craving works in every human mind. It's not personal. It's mechanical. The Buddha's insight wasn't that we should stop wanting things or stop working toward goals. His insight was that lasting peace won't be found at the end of any amount of accumulation or achievement or becoming, because the craving itself is what we're actually suffering from, not the lack of whatever we think we need. The man with 80 million gold coins was suffering from the same thing as someone with nothing, from the belief that happiness exists in some future state, in some condition other than what's present right now. And that belief keeps us running, keeps us doing, keeps us exhausting ourselves in pursuit of something that, even when we catch it, immediately turns into something else we need to chase. So if you've been feeling tired lately, if you've been feeling like no matter how much you do, it's never quite enough, if you've been feeling like you're running on a treadmill that never actually takes you anywhere, this is why. Not because you're failing, not because you need to work harder or want it more, or be better at manifesting, or any of that. Because you're trying to solve the problem of craving by feeding it, and that's exactly what keeps it alive. The wealthy man died surrounded by gold, starving. Not because the gold wasn't enough, but because gold was never going to solve what he was actually hungry for. This recognition, really seeing how this pattern operates, not just understanding it intellectually, but feeling the truth of it in your own experience, this is where something can finally shift. Not through more doing, not through more becoming, not through finally achieving enough that the hunger stops, but through seeing the hunger itself clearly, seeing how it works, seeing that it can't be satisfied by what it claims to want. And when you see that clearly, when you really see it, a question naturally arises. If endless doing doesn't bring peace, then maybe the answer is to stop doing altogether. Maybe we should just retreat, meditate, withdraw from the messiness and demands of life. Maybe real peace is found in pure stillness, in disconnecting from the world's endless needs and focusing solely on inner development. That sounds reasonable, doesn't it? If action and achievement and constant doing haven't worked, then maybe their opposite will. But here's what the Buddha discovered about that approach. The Buddha and his attendant, a monk named Ananda, were walking through a monastery one afternoon when they noticed a strange smell coming from one of the dwelling halls. They followed the smell to a small room where they found a monk lying alone on a mat, seriously ill, unable to move. He had soiled himself and was lying in his own waste, and it was clear from the state of the room that no one had tended to him in days. The Buddha looked at Ananda and asked, "Where are the other monks?" Ananda went to investigate and found them all in the meditation hall, sitting in deep concentration. When he asked why no one was caring for their sick brother, the monks explained that they were in the middle of an intensive meditation retreat. They'd been making real progress in their practice, experiencing states of deep calm, developing concentration, feeling like they were finally getting somewhere after years of effort. They didn't want to interrupt that progress. Caring for a sick monk, changing soiled bedding, cleaning up waste, dealing with the messy reality of a suffering body, that felt like a distraction from what really mattered, from the real work of spiritual development. "This is our time for practice," one monk explained. "We've been waiting for this clarity, this momentum. We can't break it now to deal with physical matters. That's not what we're here for." The Buddha didn't lecture them. He didn't scold or explain or try to convince them they were wrong. He simply went back to the sick monk's room, called Ananda to bring warm water, and together they began to care for him. They cleaned him gently, washed his body, changed his soiled bedding. They washed his robes and laid them in the sun to dry while he rested on fresh cloth. They tended to him with complete attention and care, not rushing, not treating it as an unpleasant duty to get through quickly, but as if this was exactly what they were supposed to be doing in that moment. When they finished, the Buddha called all the monks together and said something that cuts through centuries directly into modern spiritual practice. "Whoever would tend to me," he said, "should tend to the sick. Not in addition to your meditation practice, also care for the sick. Not once you've achieved enough inner peace, then you can help others, but a direct teaching that caring for the suffering is caring for the Buddha himself, that meditation separated from compassion is incomplete, that stillness used to avoid the messy reality of life isn't wisdom, it's just another form of escape." The monks thought they were being pure practitioners, serious about their spiritual development, dedicated to reaching enlightenment. They thought they were choosing the higher path by prioritizing meditation over mundane physical care. What they were actually doing was using spiritual practice to avoid what was uncomfortable, to create a bubble of peace that depended on ignoring suffering right in front of them. And this pattern, using meditation, mindfulness, spiritual practice as a way to withdraw from life rather than engage with it more fully, this is exactly what happens when people discover that endless doing doesn't work and swing to the opposite extreme. It shows up everywhere in modern spiritual culture. "I need to focus on my inner work right now" becomes a way to avoid dealing with difficult relationships or responsibilities. "I'm protecting my energy" becomes an excuse to disengage from anyone who might need something from you. Setting boundaries, which is genuinely important, gets twisted into justification for complete disconnection from others' suffering. Meditation retreats become escape hatches from regular life, rather than training grounds for being more present within it. Mindfulness gets reduced to a technique for feeling calmer, while continuing to avoid what's actually difficult. Spiritual development becomes something that happens in special protected spaces, completely separate from the ordinary demands of showing up for life. The wealthy man from Savatthi was all action with no peace, constantly accumulating, never resting, driven by endless craving until he died exhausted and empty. These monks were the opposite, all stillness with no compassion, cultivating inner states, while a fellow human being lay suffering and alone just a few rooms away. Both are suffering from the same root problem, the belief that peace and life are separate, that you have to choose between inner development and engaged presence, that your well-being and the world's needs are somehow in opposition. The Buddha's teaching cuts through this false choice entirely. Real practice isn't choosing between meditation and action, between inner work and showing up for life, between self-care and service. Real practice is understanding that these aren't opposites at all. They're inseparable aspects of the same thing. Stillness that doesn't inform action is just another way of hiding. Action that doesn't emerge from stillness is just more exhausting doing. You need both, not as a compromise or a balance, but as a complete integration where neither exists without the other. think about what the Buddha was doing in that moment with the sick monk. He wasn't thinking, "I'll take a break from my spiritual practice to deal with this physical situation and then get back to the real work." He wasn't torn between meditation and compassion, between his own peace and someone else's suffering. For him, there was no separation at all. Washing the sick monk was meditation, was wisdom, was exactly what practice looked like in that moment. This is what the Buddha meant by the middle way, though it's almost always misunderstood. Most people hear middle way and think it means moderation, finding some reasonable compromise between extremes, not going too far in any direction. But that's not what he was pointing to at all. The middle way isn't about doing a little bit of both extremes. It's about seeing through the false dichotomy entirely, understanding that the extremes are based on a misunderstanding of what practice actually is. The monks thought they had to choose meditation or service, inner development or compassionate action. The Buddha showed them that what they were calling meditation was actually avoidance, and real meditation includes the capacity to be fully present with suffering, to respond with care, to not separate your peace from life's messiness. Stillness and action aren't like oil and water, where you have to carefully balance how much of each you include. They're like inhaling and exhaling, completely different movements that are both essential aspects of the same process, neither one more important or more spiritual than the other. When you meditate with real presence, that quality of awareness naturally extends into action. When you act with real care, that brings you into the same presence you cultivate in stillness. They inform each other, complete each other, test each other. So if you've been using meditation as a way to not deal with your life, or if you've been using spiritual practice as permission to withdraw from anything difficult or demanding, it's worth looking at that honestly. Not to judge yourself for it. This is an incredibly common pattern, and it makes sense why it develops. When endless doing doesn't work, withdrawal seems like the obvious alternative. But it's just another form of the same separation, the same belief that peace exists somewhere other than here, in some state that requires you to disconnect from what's actually present. The monks, sitting in the meditation hall, thought they were being dedicated practitioners. They were actually just using practice to avoid discomfort, which isn't practice at all. It's just sophisticated avoidance. Real practice happens when you can sit in stillness for an hour and then immediately respond to someone who needs help without feeling like you've been interrupted. When meditation doesn't create a bubble you're trying to protect, but rather a quality of presence you bring everywhere. When inner work makes you more available to life, not less. The Buddha cleaning the sick monk wasn't sacrificing his peace to help someone else. His peace was completely intact. He just wasn't confused about what peace actually meant. It didn't require protected conditions or the absence of difficulty or suffering. It was steady and present regardless of what was happening, which meant it could extend into messy, uncomfortable situations without being disturbed. So we've seen both traps now. The trap of endless doing, where you exhaust yourself chasing satisfaction that never comes, accumulating and achieving and becoming until you die surrounded by everything and feeling empty. And the trap of pure stillness, where you use meditation and spiritual practice to withdraw from life, cultivating states of peace that depend on avoiding what's difficult, separating your well-being from the world's needs. Both are forms of suffering because both are based on the same fundamental misunderstanding that peace and life are separate, that you have to choose between them, that one must be sacrificed for the other. What the Buddha taught is something entirely different. Not a compromise between these extremes, not a careful balance of this much doing and that much stillness, but a complete integration where the distinction itself dissolves. And what that actually looks like in practice, how you live when you're no longer caught between these two extremes, that's what we'll explore next. There was a monk whose dedication to practice was so intense that other monks would speak of him with a mixture of admiration and concern. His name was Mahapala, and during one rainy season retreat, he made a vow that would change his life forever. In Buddhist monasteries, the rainy season is traditionally a time of intensive practice. Monks gather together for 3 months of focused meditation, study, and discipline, while the monsoons make travel difficult. It's a period meant for deep development, for pushing past comfortable limits, for really dedicating yourself to awakening. Mahapala decided that during this retreat, he would use only 3 of the 4 traditional postures: walking, standing, and sitting. He vowed that he would never lie down, not even for a moment, for the entire 3 months. No rest, no sleep, as other people experienced it, just constant practice in upright positions, maintaining awareness at all times. The other monks warned him that this was extreme, that even the Buddha had taught the importance of the 4th posture, that the body needs genuine rest to support the mind's development. But Mahapala was determined. He believed that true dedication meant no compromise, that awakening required this level of intensity, that rest was just another form of attachment he needed to overcome. For the first month, he felt strong. His practice was sharp. His mind was clear, and he felt a kind of pride in his ability to maintain this discipline, while others needed to lie down and sleep, like ordinary people. But then his eyes began to trouble him. At first it was just dryness, a feeling of strain when he tried to focus during meditation. Then came the burning sensation, like sand was caught behind his eyelids. His vision started to blur, colors became harder to distinguish, and in dim light, he found it increasingly difficult to see clearly. The other monks urged him to rest, to lie down properly, to let his body recover. But Mahapala had made a vow, and he believed that breaking it would be a greater failure than any physical consequence. Awakening was more important than comfort. he told himself. The body's complaints were just another obstacle to overcome. By the end of the 3-month retreat, Mahapala had indeed achieved something remarkable. Through his relentless effort and unwavering determination, he attained deep levels of realization. He became an awakened one, freed from the fundamental delusions that cause suffering. He had also gone completely blind. The damage to his eyes from months of never allowing them to rest properly, never giving his body the recovery it needed, was irreversible. For the rest of his life, he would navigate the world without sight, needing to be guided by other monks, dependent on their help for things that had once been simple. When the Buddha heard what had happened, he didn't praise Mahapala's dedication or hold him up as an example of commitment. Instead, he used the story as a teaching about the danger of extremes, about how even spiritual practice can become harmful when it ignores the body's genuine needs. The body has limits, the Buddha said, and wisdom includes recognizing those limits, not pretending they don't exist. Mahapala's story might sound extreme, and in some ways it is. Most people aren't making vows to never lie down for 3 months. But the pattern he fell into, pushing through every warning sign, believing that exhaustion proves dedication, treating rest as weakness, sacrificing health for achievement, this pattern is everywhere in modern life. You see it in people who work 60, 70, 80 hours a week, telling themselves and others that this is what success requires, that they'll rest later when they've made it, that sleep is for people without ambition. You see it in parents who run themselves into the ground trying to be everything for everyone, believing that their own needs don't matter as much as everyone else's, that taking time for themselves would be selfish. You see it in students who study until their minds stop working properly, in athletes who train through injuries that needed rest to heal, in activists who burn out completely because they felt guilty about not doing more. You even see it in spiritual practitioners who push themselves relentlessly, meditating for hours despite pain, attending every retreat and workshop, treating any moment of ease as laziness, convinced that awakening requires this kind of intensity. The belief underneath all of this is the same belief Mahapala had, that rest is something you earn through enough effort, that your body's signals for rest are obstacles to overcome, rather than wisdom to listen to, that there's virtue in pushing through exhaustion. But here's what the Buddha understood that Mahapala learned too late. The body and mind are not separate things, with one needing to dominate the other. They're part of the same system, and when you damage one, you damage both. Mahapala achieved awakening, but he did it at a cost that didn't need to be paid. The Buddha himself had achieved the same awakening while honoring his body's need for rest, for nourishment, for care. The physical blindness Mahapala suffered wasn't some necessary sacrifice on the altar of spiritual development. It was the predictable result of ignoring genuine limits. Rest is not weakness. Rest is not laziness. Rest is not something you have to earn by suffering enough. First, rest is how the system restores itself, how the body repairs, how the mind integrates what it has learned. When you work without rest, you're not being dedicated, you're being destructive. When you push through every signal that you need to stop, you're not being strong, you're being unwise. When you treat your body's need for recovery as an inconvenient weakness, you're not transcending limitation, you're guaranteeing that you'll hit a wall eventually. The challenging part is that this pattern often gets rewarded in the short term. Mahapala probably received praise from some monks during that first month when he seemed so dedicated. The person who works 80 hours a week gets promoted. The student who studies relentlessly gets the best grades. The parent who sacrifices everything gets called devoted. But the cost comes due, eventually. Maybe not as dramatically as going blind, but it comes in health problems, in mental breakdowns, in relationships that fall apart because you've had nothing left to give, in achieving everything you thought you wanted, and finding you're too exhausted to enjoy any of it. The Buddha's teaching on the middle way includes this, that sustainable practice, sustainable work, sustainable life requires genuine rest, not as a reward for effort, but as an essential part of the process itself. Action without rest is just another form of the endless doing we explored earlier, dressed up in the language of dedication or service or discipline. It might look different on the surface, more noble perhaps, more spiritual, more selfless, but it leads to the same place, depletion, exhaustion, and damage that didn't need to happen. So if you've been pushing yourself relentlessly, if you've been treating rest as something you'll do later when you've accomplished enough, if you've been working through every signal that you need to stop, Mahapala's story is for you. The awakening he achieved was real, and it would have been just as real if he had honored his body's need for rest, if he had included lying down as part of his practice, rather than something to transcend. The blindness wasn't a necessary price. It was an unnecessary cost of confusing intensity with wisdom. But here's what might surprise you about the opposite extreme. Remember the monks we met earlier, sitting in deep meditation while their brother lay sick and alone just rooms away. That story from the Buddha's time shows us something equally dangerous, what happens when stillness and inner work become separated from engaged, compassionate action in the world. Those monks weren't lazy. They weren't avoiding meditation or spiritual practice. In fact, they were doing exactly what most people would consider serious spiritual work, sitting in concentration, developing their inner lives, dedicating time to meditation. But when the Buddha found that sick monk lying in his own waste, neglected by his fellow practitioners who were too focused on their pure practice to deal with something messy and physical, he revealed something crucial about what practice actually means. "Whoever would tend to me," he said, "should tend to the sick." Not meditation is important, but also remember to help people sometimes. Not try to balance inner work with outer service, but a direct teaching that caring for suffering is not separate from spiritual practice. It is spiritual practice. It is how meditation expresses itself in the world when it's real. The danger of stillness without action isn't about being inactive. Plenty of people sit for hours in meditation, attend retreats, develop concentration, have profound inner experiences. The danger is when all of that inner development stays sealed off from the world, when it becomes a way of creating a bubble of peace that depends on not engaging with anything difficult or uncomfortable. This shows up in modern spiritual culture in ways that can be hard to recognize because they often sound like wisdom. Someone says, "I need to focus on my inner work right now," and uses it to avoid a difficult conversation with their partner that needs to happen. Someone talks about protecting their energy and uses it as justification to never help anyone who might need something from them. Someone practices boundaries, which are genuinely important, but twists it into complete disconnection from others' suffering. Meditation becomes an escape hatch from life rather than a way of being more present within it. Mindfulness becomes a technique for feeling calmer while avoiding what's actually challenging. Spiritual development becomes something that happens in special, protected conditions, completely separate from the messy reality of showing up for life. The Buddha's response to those meditating monks wasn't to tell them that meditation was wrong or unimportant. It was to show them that meditation separated from compassion, stillness, disconnected from responsive action, inner peace that requires ignoring suffering. None of that is actually the path he taught. The Buddhist tradition talks about two essential qualities that must develop together: wisdom and compassion. They're often described as the two wings of a bird, and the metaphor is precise. A bird with only one wing, no matter how strong that wing is, cannot fly. You can develop profound inner stillness, deep states of concentration, remarkable peace of mind, but if that doesn't naturally extend into caring for others, into showing up for suffering, into engaged presence with what's difficult, then something essential is missing. And this isn't about forcing yourself to help people when you don't want to, or feeling guilty about taking time for yourself, or never saying no to requests. It's about recognizing when your spiritual practice has become a sophisticated form of avoidance, when your inner work is actually a way of not dealing with your life. The monks in the meditation hall felt peaceful, while their brother suffered. That peace wasn't wrong, but it was incomplete. It was a peace that required specific conditions, that couldn't extend into messy situations, that broke down when confronted with something uncomfortable. Real practice develops a quality of presence that can be with anything, including suffering, including difficulty, including situations that ask something of you. It doesn't create a bubble you have to protect, but rather a capacity to respond to whatever's actually present. So if you've been using meditation or spiritual practice as a reason to disengage from life's demands, if you've been cultivating inner peace while avoiding anything that might disturb it, if your practice has made you less available to others, rather than more, the Buddha's teaching to those monks is for you. Stillness without action is just another form of the withdrawal trap we explored earlier, dressed up in spiritual language. It might look more evolved, more conscious, more enlightened, but it leads to the same place: separation, isolation, and a kind of peace that can't actually hold up when life gets real. Which brings us to what integration actually looks like. There's an old story about a boy who found a dead mouse on the road. Most people would have walked past it without a second thought, but this boy saw something others missed: an opportunity. He picked up the dead mouse and took it to a tavern where he knew the owner kept cats. "I'll sell you this mouse for your cat," he offered. The tavern owner laughed, but gave him 2 copper coins for it, thinking it was a harmless deal. The boy used those 2 coins to buy some food from a baker, but he didn't eat it himself. Instead, he waited near a garden where workers labored all day in the sun with no lunch break. When they saw the food, they eagerly bought it from him for more than he'd paid. He took his small profit and bought more food, then waited for the next group of hungry workers. Each time he didn't rush, didn't panic, didn't grab desperately at opportunity. He would pause, assess the situation, see what was actually needed, then act from that understanding. This pattern continued. With his earnings, he bought some water and waited at a crossroads on a hot day, selling it to travelers. With that profit, he bought flowers and sold them at the temple. Each step informed by awareness, each action emerging from careful observation rather than desperate grasping or passive waiting. One day, he used his accumulated money to buy some grass that he knew was perfect for flower arrangements. He gathered it carefully and sold it to the royal florist for a good price. The florist was so impressed with the quality and the boy's eye for what was needed that he hired him, eventually teaching him the trade. Years later, that boy became a wealthy merchant, but not through desperate hustle or lucky breaks. He built his fortune through a consistent pattern: pause, understand, act, repeat. Neither impulsive rushing into action, nor passive, waiting for opportunity to find him, but an integration of awareness and response. This story is called the Kulaka Seti tale, and it illustrates something essential about what practice actually looks like when it's integrated, when stillness and action aren't fighting each other, but working together as one seamless thing. Notice what the boy wasn't doing. He wasn't working frantically every moment, exhausting himself, pushing through without rest. Between each action, there was space, time to observe, to understand, to see clearly what was actually needed before moving. But he also wasn't just sitting around in meditation, waiting for the universe to provide. He wasn't so focused on inner peace that he never engaged with practical reality. Each period of observation naturally led to action, and each action created conditions for the next period of observation. This is what integration actually means. It's not trying to balance stillness and action like they're two separate things you need equal amounts of. It's recognizing that right action emerges from understanding, and understanding deepens through action. They're not opposites, they're phases of the same process. Think about your own life for a moment. When you make decisions from panic or desperation, when you're reacting rather than responding, when you're so caught up in constant doing that you never pause to understand what you're actually doing or why, how do those decisions usually turn out? Probably not great. Probably you end up creating new problems, taking actions that seemed urgent but weren't actually helpful, exhausting yourself without accomplishing what actually mattered. And when you're paralyzed by overthinking, when you understand something needs to happen but you never actually do it, when you're so focused on achieving perfect clarity before acting that you never act at all, how does that usually work out? Also not great. Probably you watch opportunities pass, let situations deteriorate that could have been addressed, feel increasingly disconnected from life, while you sit on the sidelines waiting for conditions to be perfect. But when you can pause enough to see clearly, then act from that clarity, then pause again to see the results of your action and understand what's needed next, this is when things actually flow. This is what the boy with the mouse understood that most people miss. Each action emerged from observation. Each observation naturally led to action, neither rushing nor hesitating, but moving at the pace of actual understanding. In your work, this might look like taking time to truly understand a problem before rushing to fix it, then acting decisively once you understand, then pausing again to see if your action had the effect you intended. In relationships, it might look like sitting with difficult emotions long enough to understand them before reacting, then responding from that understanding rather than from reactive patterns, then paying attention to how your response lands and what's actually needed next. In your spiritual practice, it might look like meditation that naturally flows into more conscious action in the world, and action in the world that naturally reveals what needs deeper attention in meditation. Not two separate activities you're trying to balance, but one integrated practice, expressing itself in different forms. The boy didn't accumulate wealth by working every moment like Mahapala practiced every moment. And he didn't accumulate wealth by just sitting in meditation, hoping prosperity would find him, like those monks hoped awakening would come through pure stillness. He built something real through an integrated approach where observation informed action and action informed observation in a continuous flow that honored both the need to understand and the need to engage. This is the middle way the Buddha taught, not moderation or compromise, not carefully measuring out equal portions of this and that, but a complete integration where stillness and action aren't opposites competing for your attention, but aspects of one seamless practice. When you're living this way, you're not trying to balance anything. You're not exhausting yourself trying to do everything. You're not withdrawing into protected peace while life happens somewhere else. You're simply present with what's actually here, responding from understanding rather than reaction or avoidance. The boy started with a dead mouse and built a fortune, not because he was lucky or because he worked harder than everyone else or because he meditated more purely, but because he understood something fundamental about how things actually work, that clear seeing naturally informs wise action, and wise action naturally reveals what needs to be seen next. This is available to you right now, in whatever situation you're facing. Not as some distant ideal to achieve, not as something that requires years of training or special conditions, but as a simple shift in how you relate to life itself. Pause enough to see clearly. Act from what you see. Pause again to see the results. Repeat. Not exhausting yourself with endless doing, not withdrawing into stillness that disconnects from life, but moving through the world with the integrated awareness that allows both rest and engagement, both stillness and action, both understanding and response. This is what practice looks like when it's real, when it's not something you do in special moments separated from life, but rather the quality you bring to life itself, moment by moment, response by response, integration by integration. A friend calls you late at night, crying. They've called you like this before, many times before, always in crisis, always needing something urgently, always pulling you into their chaos. And you're tired. You worked all day, you have an early meeting tomorrow, and honestly, you're starting to feel resentful because this pattern never changes, no matter how much you help. But they're your friend, and they're suffering, and shouldn't you be there for people when they need you? Isn't that what a good person does? Isn't compassion about showing up even when it's hard? So, you answer the phone. You listen for 2 hours. You give advice they won't follow. You stay up way too late. And the next day you're exhausted and resentful and already dreading the next time they'll call. Was answering that phone right action? Here's the question most people never ask. What was that yes actually coming from? Because on the surface, it looks like compassion, like being a good friend, like doing the right thing. But underneath, if you're honest with yourself, that yes probably came from several uncomfortable places. Fear that if you don't answer, they'll think you're a bad friend. Guilt about having boundaries when someone is suffering. An old pattern from childhood about having to be the helper, the fixer, the one who's always available. Maybe even a subtle need to be needed, to feel important, because someone depends on you. None of that is compassion. That's fear, guilt, and old conditioning dressed up in compassionate clothing. Now imagine the same phone call, but this time you pause before answering. Not a long pause, just 2 seconds of actual awareness before reacting. In those 2 seconds, you check in honestly. Do I have capacity right now? Will answering actually help them? Or will it enable a pattern that's keeping them stuck? What does this situation genuinely need? And let's say the clear answer is, no, I don't have capacity, and me being available at all hours is actually preventing them from developing their own resources for handling difficult emotions. So you don't answer. Instead, you text in the morning, I saw you called last night. I wasn't available, but I'm here if you want to talk today, between 2 and 4. That no, that boundary feels terrible in your body. You feel guilty, you worry about them, you wonder if you're being selfish. But underneath the discomfort, there's also clarity. You know you did what was actually right, even though it didn't feel good. This is what the Buddha meant by right action, not action that makes you feel virtuous or looks good to others, but action that comes from understanding rather than confusion. And the key to understanding whether your action is right isn't what it looks like from the outside. It's what it's coming from underneath. The Buddha taught that all action comes from one of 3 roots, and those roots determine everything about what that action creates. The first root is grasping, that quality where you need to get, acquire, possess, control. Not just wanting things, but that tight, contracted feeling where you must have something or someone, where there's never enough, where you're always reaching for more. The second root is pushing away, that quality where you need to destroy, eliminate, get rid of. Not just disliking things, but that harsh energy that wants to make uncomfortable things disappear, including people, parts of yourself, anything that threatens your comfort. The third root is confusion, not understanding how things actually work, operating from assumptions and beliefs rather than clear seeing. It's that fog where you're not really sure why you're doing something, you're just following habit, or should, or what seems like it ought to be right. When action comes from these roots, it creates suffering. Always. Not because the universe punishes you, but because actions rooted in confusion naturally create confused results. Look at answering that phone call from fear and guilt. You're grasping for approval, pushing away your own needs, confused about what actually helps. And the result? Resentment, exhaustion, enabling, a friendship that feels draining rather than nourishing. Nobody intended that suffering. You were trying to help, But the action came from confusion, so it created more problems than it solved. Now consider what happens when action comes from the opposite roots. Instead of grasping, there's generosity, that open quality where you genuinely want to share because you understand that hoarding doesn't bring security. Instead of pushing away, there's kindness, that warmth where you can be with difficulty without needing to destroy it, where you can say no without hatred. Instead of confusion, there's wisdom, that clarity where you see how things actually work, where you understand causes and effects, where your actions are based on direct perception rather than belief. The boundary with your friend that comes from this place feels completely different. You're not saying no because you don't care. You care deeply, which is exactly why you're not enabling a pattern that keeps them stuck. You're not hoarding your time selfishly. You're protecting your capacity to actually be useful rather than burning yourself out. You're not confused about what helps. You see clearly that always being available prevents them from developing their own strength. Same external action, not answering the phone, completely different route, completely different effect on everyone involved. Here's where it gets interesting. You can feel the difference in your own body before you even act. When action is about to come from grasping, there's a tightness, a desperation, a must-have quality. Your breathing gets shallow, your chest contracts, your mind starts racing through strategies to get what you want. When it's about to come from pushing away, there's a hardness, an aggression, a get rid of this quality. Your jaw clenches, your shoulders tense. There's heat and irritation in your body. When it's about to come from confusion, there's fog, uncertainty, a floaty, disconnected quality. You're not quite present. You're operating on autopilot. You might not even know why you're about to do what you're about to do. But when action is about to come from understanding, there's clarity, even if there's also discomfort. Your body might not like it. Setting that boundary feels awful. But underneath the discomfort, there's steadiness, certainty, a quality of being grounded in truth. This is how you check your own actions in real time. Before you say yes to something, pause and feel what the yes is coming from. Is there fear in it? Guilt? A need to be seen as good? That's grasping and confusion. Before you say no to something, pause and feel what the no is coming from. Is there hatred in it? A wish for the person or situation to just disappear? That's pushing away. Or is there clarity? Even if it's uncomfortable, can you feel that you're acting from understanding rather than reaction? That's what makes action right, not whether it's comfortable or looks virtuous, but whether it emerges from seeing clearly rather than operating from confusion. Your coworker asks you to cover their shift again. and you notice the tight, obligated feeling in your chest as you start to say yes. That tightness is information. It's telling you this yes is coming from fear, not generosity. You pause, check in honestly about your capacity, and say no kindly but clearly. Your coworker might be disappointed, but you're acting from truth rather than fear, which serves both of you better than a resentful yes. Your partner does something that bothers you, and you feel the heat of irritation rising, the impulse to snap at them. That heat is information. It's showing you that your about to happen response is coming from pushing away, from wanting them to be different, rather than understanding what's actually happening. You pause, let the irritation be there without acting on it, and when you do speak, it comes from wanting to understand rather than wanting to attack. Someone asks for your opinion, and you notice you're about to say what you think they want to hear rather than what you actually think. That impulse to please is information. It's showing you the action is about to come from grasping for approval rather than from honesty. You pause, connect with what you actually believe, and share it truthfully, even though it's uncomfortable. None of this means you always act perfectly. You won't. You'll still react from confusion sometimes, still get caught in old patterns, still act from fear, or grasping, or pushing away. But when you do, you'll know it. You'll feel the difference between action that comes from clarity and action that comes from confusion. And that knowing itself changes things, because you can't keep acting from confusion once you clearly see that's what you're doing. Over time, as you pay attention to what your actions are coming from, as you choose understanding over reaction more and more often, something shifts. You stop second-guessing yourself constantly because you're not operating from fear. You stop feeling guilty about boundaries because you understand they serve everyone. You stop being torn between conflicting impulses because you're acting from a clearer place than those impulses arise from. The clarity becomes its own reward, not because you're now perfectly virtuous, but because you're no longer constantly at war with yourself, no longer exhausted from doing things you don't actually want to do, no longer confused about whether your actions are helping or harming. This is what right action actually means. Action that emerges from understanding, that comes from seeing clearly rather than reacting from confusion, that reduces suffering rather than creating more of it. And you can trust that, not because you'll never make mistakes, but because you're paying attention to what actually matters, what your actions are coming from, not just what they look like from the outside. That trust, that clarity, that's what lets you act with confidence, even when it's difficult, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it looks nothing like what you thought being good was supposed to look like. You sit down to meditate after a difficult day at work. Your boss criticized you in a meeting. You made a mistake that affected your team, and there's a conversation you need to have tomorrow that you're dreading. You close your eyes, focus on your breath, and within minutes, you feel yourself starting to relax. The tension in your shoulders eases, your mind quiets, and there's a sense of peace settling over you like a blanket. After 20 minutes, you open your eyes feeling calmer, more centered, grateful for the practice that gives you this refuge from the stress of daily life. But here's the question that matters. When you stand up from that cushion, are you more able to have that difficult conversation tomorrow, or are you just better at not thinking about it? Because there are two very different kinds of stillness, and from the outside, they can look almost identical. One kind makes you more present, more capable, more able to engage with life, including its difficulties. The other kind creates a pleasant bubble that disconnects you from anything uncomfortable, that makes you more fragile rather than more strong. The difference isn't obvious until you test it. Imagine you're sitting in meditation and your phone buzzes with a text you know is going to be problematic. Maybe from your ex, maybe from a family member you're in conflict with, maybe about a situation at work that needs addressing. In one version of stillness, you feel the impulse to check the phone, you feel the anxiety rising, and you use your meditation practice to push those feelings away, to get back to the peaceful state you were in before the interruption. You focus harder on your breath. You remind yourself that you're here to find peace. You treat the anxiety and the urge to check the phone as distractions to be eliminated. And it works. You settle back into calm, the feelings fade, the session ends, and you feel good about your practice. In another version of stillness, you feel the impulse to check the phone, you feel the anxiety rising, and instead of pushing it away, you stay present with it. You feel where the anxiety lives in your body, the tightness in your chest, the shallow breathing, the churning in your stomach. You don't try to make it go away. You don't follow the anxious thoughts, but you also don't pretend it's not there. You stay steady while the anxiety is present, not fighting it, not feeding it, just being with what's actually here. And gradually, not because you're pushing it away, but because you're not adding to it, the intensity naturally decreases. The anxiety is still there, but you're not as caught in it, not as controlled by it. When you stand up from that second version, you're actually more capable of dealing with whatever that text message contains. Not because you're calmer in some artificial way, but because you've just practiced being steady while difficulty is present. The first version, using meditation to escape discomfort, creates a kind of peace that's fragile, that only works when conditions are protected, that falls apart as soon as life gets challenging. The second version, using meditation to be present with whatever's actually here, creates a steadiness that can hold difficulty, that makes you more capable rather than more avoidant. This is the difference between stillness as awareness and stillness as numbness. Numbness feels peaceful, and that's why it's seductive. You sit down overwhelmed by life's demands, you meditate, and you feel the overwhelm fade into pleasant neutrality. You've been anxious about something, you meditate, and the anxiety dulls into a kind of blankness. But that numbness isn't freedom, it's just temporary disconnection. And the cost shows up later, when you realize you're using meditation the same way someone might use alcohol or television or any other escape, to not feel things, rather than to be with them more skillfully. Real stillness, the kind that actually cultivates wisdom, includes awareness of everything that's present, including discomfort. Your body hurts during meditation, and instead of fighting the pain or trying to transcend it, you're aware of exactly how it feels, where it is, how it changes moment to moment. You're not making pain into a problem to be solved. You're just clearly aware that this is what's present right now. Anger comes up during meditation, and instead of pushing it away as bad or following it into fantasy, you're aware of the physical sensation of anger, the heat, the tightness, the energy of it, without either suppressing it or acting on it. Boredom arises during meditation, and instead of trying to make something interesting happen, you're aware of the quality of boredom itself, the restlessness, the mental searching, the subtle discomfort of nothing special occurring. This kind of stillness is training in being present with reality, as it actually is, not as you wish it were. And that training is what makes it useful for life, rather than an escape from life. Think about what happens in your regular day when something difficult occurs. Criticism from someone you respect, news that a plan fell through, physical pain, disappointment, fear, uncertainty. If your meditation practice has been about achieving pleasant states and avoiding unpleasant ones, you have no training for these moments. Your only tools are either pushing the difficulty away or being completely overwhelmed by it. But if your meditation practice has been about staying present with whatever's actually here, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, then these difficult moments in daily life become just more opportunities to practice what you've been training in. Someone criticizes you, and instead of immediately defending yourself or collapsing into self-doubt, there's space where you can feel the sting of criticism, notice the impulse to react, and respond from awareness rather than automatic pattern. You get disappointing news, and instead of either denying how much it hurts or being completely consumed by disappointment, you can feel the disappointment fully while also remaining steady, capable of seeing what needs to happen next. This is what meditation is actually for, not to give you a pleasant break from reality, but to train your capacity to be with reality in all its forms without either shutting down or falling apart. The Buddha taught specific states of deep concentration, profound experiences of stillness, where thinking drops away, where there's just vast peace, or intense clarity, or boundless space. These states are real, And they're valuable, but they're training tools, not the destination. You can achieve the deepest possible concentration, can access states of peace more profound than anything ordinary consciousness knows. And if that doesn't translate into being more capable in your actual life, into suffering less and causing less suffering, then you've just become really good at a special kind of temporary escape. The point of deep stillness is what it lets you see when you come back out of it. When your mind is extremely quiet, you can see patterns of thought and reaction that are invisible in normal mental noise. You can see how suffering arises, how craving works, how attachment operates, not as philosophy, but as direct perception of what's actually happening in your own experience. And that seeing, that insight that emerges from stillness, that's what changes things. Not the pleasant feeling of deep peace, though that's nice while it lasts, but the understanding that remains after the special state fades. Here's a practical way to tell the difference between meditation that's serving you and meditation that's becoming another form of avoidance. After you meditate, are you more able to engage with your life or less? Can you have difficult conversations more skillfully? Or do you feel more distant from people? Are you more capable of dealing with problems? Or are you more irritated when reality intrudes on your peace? If meditation is making you more fragile, more dependent on perfect conditions, more unable to handle normal life stress, then something's off in how you're practicing. You're probably using it as escape rather than training. But if meditation is making you more stable, more capable of being present with difficulty, more able to respond wisely rather than react automatically, then you're on the right track. You're developing real stillness, not just temporary disconnection. This doesn't mean meditation should feel like work or that you should never experience peace. Deep rest is essential, genuine peace is valuable, and there's nothing wrong with experiencing stillness that feels wonderful. The question is, what that stillness enables you to do when you're not meditating. Real rest restores you. You come back to life with more capacity, more clarity, more ability to engage. False rest depletes you by disconnecting you from the skills you need to actually live. You come back more fragile, more dependent on protected conditions, less able to handle normal challenges. Think about sleep as an analogy. Good sleep makes you more capable when you wake up, clearer thinking, better mood, more energy, stronger immune system. But if you were sleeping to avoid life, staying in bed not because your body needs rest, but because being awake is too difficult, that's not rest, that's escape disguised as rest. The same thing happens with meditation. 20 minutes of genuine stillness that increases your capacity to be present with life. That's training, that's valuable, that's serving you. 20 minutes of using meditation to not deal with your life. That's escape, and eventually it makes you less capable, not more. So when you sit down to meditate, pay attention to what you're actually doing. Are you training in being present with reality, including uncomfortable reality? Or are you trying to achieve a state where uncomfortable reality doesn't exist? Are you developing the capacity to stay steady while difficult things are present? Or are you developing skill at pushing difficult things away? Is your practice making you more able to engage with life, including its challenges? Or is it making you more dependent on having perfect conditions to feel okay? The stillness that actually cultivates wisdom is the kind that makes you more present, not more absent. More capable of being with difficulty, not more skilled at avoiding it. More engaged with reality, not more disconnected from it. And here's what might surprise you. That kind of stillness is actually more peaceful than the escape version, not less. When you're no longer fighting with reality, when you can be with what's actually here, without either clinging to it or pushing it away, there's a quality of ease that doesn't depend on conditions being perfect. You can be still and engaged at the same time. You can have deep peace and still show up for life's difficulties. You can rest genuinely while remaining available, present, responsive to what's actually needed. This permission to be still without withdrawing, to rest without disconnecting, to find peace that includes rather than excludes reality. This is what right stillness actually means. Not meditation as escape from your life, but meditation as training for your life. Not stillness that makes you fragile, but stillness that makes you strong. Not peace that requires perfect conditions, but peace that can hold whatever's actually present. And when you practice this way, something shifts fundamentally. You stop being torn between needing stillness and needing to engage with life, because you understand they're not opposites, they're complementary aspects of being fully present with what's actually here. There was a woman named Pingala who lived as a slave in a household in ancient India. Her days were filled with work, carrying water, grinding grain, cooking, cleaning, tending to the needs of the family who owned her. But she had one thing that made her life bearable: a man she loved who would visit her when he could. One evening, after finishing her work late, Pingala received a message that her lover would come to her that night. She prepared as best she could, bathed, arranged her small room, and then sat by the threshold of the door, waiting for him to arrive. The first watch of the night passed, those first few hours after sunset, when the household settled into sleep and the streets grew quiet. She sat watching the road, listening for footsteps, her heart jumping at every sound. "He'll be coming soon," she told herself. "He's probably just delayed. Any moment now." The middle watch passed, those deep hours of night, when even the sounds of distant voices fade and the world feels utterly still. She remained at the threshold, eyes straining into darkness, her body tense with anticipation. He must have had trouble getting away, she reasoned, but he wouldn't break his promise. He'll come, just a little longer now. The last watch approached, those hours before dawn when the sky begins its slow shift from black to deep blue. Pingala was exhausted, her eyes burning, her body aching from sitting in one position for hours, her mind spinning with worry and hope. Maybe he's hurt, she thought. Maybe someone prevented him from leaving. Maybe if I just wait a little longer. And then, as the sky began to lighten with approaching dawn, something shifted in her mind. She saw clearly, suddenly, unavoidably, he was not coming. Not tonight, not in the next few minutes, not at all. Whatever the reason, the simple fact was that he was not here and he was not coming. The moment she truly accepted this, not with resignation or bitterness, but with simple recognition of what was actually true, something extraordinary happened. All the tension that had been holding her upright for hours released. All the mental energy she'd been using to maintain hope, to explain away his absence, to keep believing, all of that just stopped. She lay down where she had been sitting, and within moments fell into the deepest, most peaceful sleep she'd had in months. The Buddha, in telling this story, pointed to what happened in that moment when Pingala stopped fighting reality. While hope in what cannot be brings suffering, he said, acceptance of what is brings peace. Not because acceptance is giving up, but because fighting against reality, arguing with what's already true, resisting what's already happened, is the source of most suffering. Think about what Pingala was doing during those long hours of waiting. She wasn't just sitting by the door, she was in constant struggle with what was actually happening. Reality was, he's not here. Her mind was, but he should be, he will be, he must be, just wait a little longer. Every passing moment, she was fighting with the present moment, refusing to acknowledge what was actually true, maintaining, through sheer mental effort, a version of reality that didn't match what was happening. And that fight, that constant pushing against what is, that's what exhausted her. Not the physical act of sitting up all night, but the mental act of refusing to accept what was actually present. The moment she stopped fighting, the exhaustion disappeared and peace arrived immediately. This pattern is everywhere in human life. You're in a relationship that isn't working, and you spend months or years fighting with the reality of it, telling yourself it will get better if I just try harder, if I just wait longer. Every day you maintain that fight with reality, you suffer. Not because the relationship is difficult, that's just pain, but because you're refusing to see clearly what's actually true about it. Then one day you see it. This isn't going to change. This is what this relationship actually is. And with that clear seeing comes immediate relief, even if what you're seeing is painful. The relief comes from finally stopping the fight with reality. Or you've been working toward a particular career path, and circumstances keep preventing it. You don't get accepted. The funding doesn't come through. The opportunity falls through again and again. You can spend years fighting this, telling yourself you just need to try harder, apply one more time, refuse to accept that this path might not be open. That fight is exhausting. When you finally see clearly, not with bitterness or defeat, but with simple recognition that this particular door is closed, there's relief. Or you're aging, your body isn't what it used to be, and you spend enormous energy fighting this fact, trying to make your body be what it was 20 years ago. The pain of aging is real. Joints that hurt, energy that's lower, capabilities that have changed. But the suffering comes from fighting it, from telling yourself, it shouldn't be this way. When you stop that fight, when you acknowledge, yes, this is what aging is, this is what my body actually is now, the additional suffering drops away immediately. This is what the Buddha meant by the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is what life includes. Bodies age, people die, plans fail, relationships end, things break, loss happens. That's just reality. Suffering is what we add when we fight with pain, when we insist it shouldn't be happening, when we argue with reality instead of acknowledging it. Pingala's lover not showing up, that's pain, disappointment, loneliness, sadness of hopes not realized. But sitting there for hours maintaining the fiction that he was still coming, fighting with the reality that he wasn't there, that's suffering. Notice what happened the moment she stopped fighting. The pain didn't disappear. She was still alone, still disappointed. But the suffering ended immediately because she stopped resisting what was actually true. This doesn't mean you shouldn't care about things or that you should passively accept everything without trying to change anything. There's a huge difference between acceptance and resignation. Resignation is, this is terrible and I'm helpless, so I'll just give up. That's defeat, hopelessness, checking out. Acceptance is, this is what's actually happening right now, whether I like it or not. That's clear seeing. That's reality. That's the foundation for any wise action that might be possible. And here's what's important. Acceptance doesn't mean approval. You can fully accept that something is happening while also working to change it, if change is possible. You can accept that a relationship is currently not working while also trying to repair it. You can accept that you didn't get the job while also continuing to apply for others. But you can't work effectively to change something while simultaneously denying that it's actually happening. You can't fix a relationship while pretending it's fine. You can't find a new path while refusing to acknowledge the current one is blocked. Acceptance is seeing what is. That clear seeing is what makes wise action possible. Fighting with reality just uses up all your energy in a battle you can't win. Think about a time when you finally stopped fighting something you'd been resisting for months or years. Maybe you finally acknowledged that the career you'd been forcing yourself toward wasn't actually what you wanted. Maybe you finally saw that someone you loved wasn't going to change in the way you'd been hoping. Maybe you finally accepted that a chapter of your life was over, no matter how much you wanted it to continue. Can you remember the relief that came with that acceptance? Even if what you were accepting was painful, wasn't there something that eased the moment you stopped fighting? That ease, that relief, that's not giving up. That's arriving at reality. That's finally being present with what actually is, instead of what you wish were true. Pingala couldn't make her lover appear by force of will or intensity of hope. That was beyond her control. So the hours she spent fighting that reality were just hours of self-created suffering added on top of natural disappointment. The moment she accepted what was actually true, he's not coming, she could finally rest. Not because the situation changed, but because she stopped struggling against it. This is available to you right now with whatever you've been fighting. The relationship that isn't what you want it to be, what if you stopped fighting with that fact and just saw it clearly? That doesn't mean you have to stay or leave. It just means you stop exhausting yourself pretending it's something it's not. The body that's aging or ill or not what you wish it were, what if you stopped fighting with that reality? That doesn't mean you stop caring for yourself. It just means you stop suffering from wanting your body to be different than it is. The past that happened differently than you wish, what if you stopped fighting with what already occurred? That doesn't mean you approve of it. It just means you stop suffering from wanting history to be different. Whatever it is you've been resisting, whatever reality you've been fighting, what if you just stopped? What if you let yourself see clearly what's actually true, without adding should or shouldn't, without comparing it to what you wish were true, without arguing with reality? The relief that Pingala felt when she finally accepted, he is not coming, that relief is available the moment you stop fighting with what is. Not because pain disappears, but because the suffering you create through resistance can end immediately, right now, the moment you're willing to see clearly what's actually present. And that peace that comes from finally stopping the fight with reality, that's not defeat or resignation. That's wisdom. That's arriving at truth. That's the foundation of genuine peace. When the Buddha returned to a certain village after 3 years away, a crowd gathered to hear him teach. Among them was a 16-year-old girl, the daughter of a weaver who had been only 13 when the Buddha last visited. During that previous visit, the Buddha had given a teaching on death awareness, not morbid dwelling on mortality, but clear recognition that death is certain and its timing is completely unknown. Most of the crowd had listened politely and then returned to their lives, essentially unchanged. But this young girl had taken the teaching deeply to heart. For 3 years, she had practiced exactly what the Buddha taught, maintaining awareness throughout her daily life that death could come at any moment, that this breath might be her last, that nothing in this world is permanent, including her own existence. Not in a fearful way, not in a way that made her withdraw from life, but in a way that kept her completely present with whatever was actually happening right now, because now was the only moment she could be certain of having. When the Buddha arrived and saw her in the crowd, he recognized something in her presence, a quality of awareness, a depth of understanding that was rare even among people who'd been practicing for decades. So he decided to test her understanding publicly, and he did it in a way that seemed designed to embarrass her. He asked her 4 questions, and each one seemed more confusing than the last. "Where do you come from?" the Buddha asked. Without hesitation, the girl replied, "I do not know." The crowd stirred uncomfortably. Everyone knew where she came from. She was the weaver's daughter, born right here in this village. Why would she say she didn't know? The Buddha continued, "Where are you going?" Again, without pause. Now the crowd was getting irritated. This seemed disrespectful, like she was mocking the Buddha with nonsense answers. She was going wherever she chose to go. Why claim not to know? The Buddha asked the 3rd question, "Do you not know?" And she answered, "I know." People were completely confused now. She didn't know, but she did know. This made no sense at all. The Buddha asked the final question, "Do you know?" And she replied, "I do not know." The crowd erupted in whispers and complaints. This young girl was making a fool of herself, giving contradictory nonsense answers to the Buddha's simple questions. Some people called out that she should stop wasting everyone's time with games. But the Buddha raised his hand for silence and asked her to explain her answers to everyone. She spoke clearly and without embarrassment. "When you asked where I come from, I said, I do not know, because I do not know which realm or which existence I came from before this life. That past is completely unknown to me. When you asked where I am going, I said I do not know, because I do not know where I will be reborn after this life ends, or when that will happen. That future is completely unknown to me. When you asked if I do not know, I said I know, because I know with complete certainty that death will come. That is absolutely certain, not unknown. When you asked if I know, I said I do not know, because I do not know when death will come. It could be today, tonight, this moment. That timing is completely unknown to me. The crowd fell silent. What had seemed like foolish contradiction was actually perfect precision. She had answered, with exact truth about what can be known and what cannot. The Buddha turned to the crowd and said this young girl understood the teaching more completely than people who had been listening to him for decades. She wasn't confused. She was crystal clear about the only things that actually matter. The past is gone. The future is unknown. Death is certain. Its timing is uncertain. And therefore this present moment is all we actually have. Many people in the crowd had a breakthrough right there, hearing her explanation. They suddenly understood what complete present moment awareness actually meant, not as philosophy, but as lived reality. Think about what this young girl was demonstrating. She wasn't pretending to know things she didn't know. She wasn't filling in the unknowable with belief or hope or assumption. She was completely comfortable saying, I do not know, about things that genuinely cannot be known. And because she was clear about what she didn't know, she was equally clear about what she did know. Death is certain. This moment is real. Presence is possible right now. This is the opposite of how most people operate. We pretend to know the future. We make plans as if we're certain we'll be alive to fulfill them. We worry about outcomes as if we can control them. We live in constant anxiety about things that haven't happened yet and might never happen. We pretend the past defines us. We carry old identities, old wounds, old stories about who we are, as if the person we were years ago is the same person sitting here now. We avoid the only things we actually know for certain, that this moment is happening, that death will come, that nothing lasts, that change is constant. The weaver's daughter had it exactly backwards from normal human confusion, which meant she had it exactly right. She knew what was knowable, this breath, this moment, this present awareness. She didn't know what was unknowable, when death would come, where she came from, where she was going. And she was completely at peace with both the knowing and the not knowing. Now bring this into your actual life. You're working on a project and you're anxious about how it will turn out. Will it succeed? Will people like it? Will it lead to the opportunities you're hoping for? The truth is, you don't know. You genuinely do not know how it will turn out. You can work skillfully. You can do your best. You can make wise choices, but the outcome is not actually knowable right now. What you do know is that you can work on it fully in this moment. You can be present with the work itself, rather than lost in anxiety about future results. You can act without clinging to outcomes you can't control. Most people do the opposite. They're barely present with the actual work because they're so caught up in worrying about results they can't know or control. They exhaust themselves with anxiety about the unknowable future, while barely showing up for the knowable present. Or you're in a relationship, and you're consumed with questions about where it's going. Will this last? Is this person the one? What will happen 5 years from now? You don't know. You genuinely cannot know the future of a relationship because you don't even know if you'll both be alive tomorrow. What you do know is whether you want to be present with this person right now, in this conversation, in this moment. You can be fully here with what's actually happening rather than partially here while worrying about an imaginary future. Or you're facing a decision and you're paralyzed because you can't be certain it's the right choice. What if you choose wrong? What if you regret it? What if it leads to disaster? You don't know. You cannot know in advance how any choice will unfold because the future hasn't happened yet. What you do know is what feels true and clear right now with the information and understanding you currently have. You can make the choice from presence rather than from fantasy about knowing an unknowable future. This is what the weaver's daughter understood at 16, that most people never understand at 60, the power and freedom of clearly distinguishing between what can be known and what cannot. She wasn't wishy-washy or uncertain about life. She was more certain than people who pretend to know things they don't. She was certain about the present moment, certain about death's inevitability, certain about what she was experiencing right now. And because she wasn't wasting energy pretending to know the unknowable, she had full energy available for being present with what was actually here. Think about how much energy you spend trying to control or predict or worry about things you genuinely cannot know. How will your career unfold over the next decade? You don't know. Will your children grow up to be happy and successful? You don't know. Will the work you're doing now matter in 5 years? You don't know. When will you die? You don't know. And yet you probably spend hours every day worrying about these unknowable things, planning for futures that may never arrive, living in anxiety about outcomes you cannot control. What if you just stopped? Not stopped caring, not stopped working, or planning, or acting, but stopped pretending you know things you don't know, stopped wasting energy on anxiety about the unknowable. What if you brought all that energy back to what you actually can know? This moment, this breath, this choice, this action, this presence. The weaver's daughter practiced death awareness not to become morbid, but to become alive. Knowing that death could come at any moment meant she couldn't waste this moment on things that don't actually matter. Knowing the future was unknowable meant she could be fully present with what was actually here. This is how you act without attachment to results, not by not caring about results, but by clearly seeing that you don't actually control them, so clinging to them just creates suffering. You do the work as skillfully as you can right now. You make the choice that seems wisest with current understanding. You show up fully for the relationship as it actually is today. You care deeply about all of it. And you hold it all lightly because you understand the truth the weaver's daughter understood. You don't know where it's all going. You don't know how long any of it will last. You don't know when death will come for you or anyone you love. So you give yourself completely to this moment, because this moment is all you actually have, and you do it without the suffering of clinging to futures you cannot know or pasts you cannot change. That's not pessimism or resignation. That's freedom. That's what it means to act without attachment to outcomes, to do everything fully while knowing you control almost nothing. The weaver's daughter, at 16, understood this so completely that even the Buddha held her up as an example to people who'd been practicing for decades. Not because she knew more than them, but because she was crystal clear about what she didn't know, and that clarity freed her to be completely present with what she did know, this moment, this breath, this one precious life that will definitely end at an unknowable time. You can access that same clarity right now. You can stop pretending to know the unknowable, stop exhausting yourself with anxiety about what you cannot control, and bring all your presence back to what's actually here. And when you do, you discover the same freedom she did, the ability to act completely, care deeply, work skillfully, love fully, all while holding everything lightly because you understand the truth. You don't know how any of it will end, and that not knowing is wisdom, not ignorance. Two people walk into the same homeless shelter on the same day and volunteer for 3 hours doing exactly the same work, serving meals, cleaning tables, talking with people who come in for help. From the outside, their actions are identical. Same time commitment, same tasks, same results in terms of meals served and people helped. But one person is there because they genuinely want to help, because they understand that people are suffering and they have capacity to ease that suffering, even in small ways. They're present with each person they serve. They're paying attention to needs. They leave feeling like they participated in something meaningful. The other person is there because it looks good on their resume, because they want to be able to tell people at parties that they volunteer, because they feel guilty about their comfortable life, and this makes them feel like a good person. They're counting the hours until they can leave. They're barely present with the people they're serving. They leave feeling virtuous, but somehow empty. Same action, completely different intention. And here's what matters: completely different effect on the person doing it. The Buddha taught that intention is what creates consequences in your own mind and heart. not the external form of what you do. He called this the law of intentional action, not that the universe judges you and punishes or rewards accordingly, but that the state of mind you act from shapes who you become. When you act from genuine care, you strengthen the capacity for care in yourself. When you act from desire for recognition, you strengthen the need for recognition. When you act from guilt, you strengthen guilt. When you act from wisdom, you develop more wisdom. The homeless shelter volunteer who's there from genuine care leaves feeling connected to something larger than themselves, feeling like their life has meaning, feeling more capable of caring. They're not just helping others, they're becoming more of who they want to be. The volunteer who's there for external validation leaves feeling like they checked a box, performed their duty, earned their moral credits. But underneath there's hollowness because they know they weren't really present, weren't really giving, weren't really connecting. They're becoming more dependent on external validation, not less. This is why the Buddha said to examine your intentions more carefully than your actions. Not because actions don't matter, they obviously affect others and the world, but because for your own liberation, for your own freedom from suffering, what you're cultivating in your own mind through your intentions is what shapes your life. Think about your own work, whatever you do to earn money or contribute to the world. Are you working primarily for recognition, for validation, to prove something to yourself or others? Or are you working because you genuinely find the work meaningful, because it serves something you care about, because it's an expression of your values? The external work might be identical either way. You show up on time, you do the tasks, you produce the results. But the internal experience and the person you're becoming through doing it are completely different depending on intention. When you work from needing validation, you're in constant anxiety about whether you're good enough, whether people notice, whether you're measuring up. Success feels temporarily good, but then immediately you need more validation. Criticism feels devastating because it attacks your sense of worth. You're exhausted not from the work itself, but from the constant need to prove yourself. When you work from genuine care about the work or service, there's effort, but not that same exhaustion. Success feels satisfying without needing to be everything. Criticism stings, but doesn't destroy you because your worth isn't tied up in external validation. You're becoming more stable, more grounded, more capable. Or think about your spiritual practice, if you have one: meditation, prayer, study, whatever form it takes. Are you practicing to become special, to achieve something impressive, to be more spiritual than other people? Or are you practicing because you genuinely want to suffer less and cause less suffering because you're curious about truth, because it helps you be more present with life? Same meditation posture, same amount of time, same techniques. But if the intention is ego-driven, if you're meditating to become impressive, or special, or better than others. You're actually strengthening ego, not dissolving it. You might achieve impressive states, might develop concentration, might have experiences you can talk about, but you're becoming more identified with being a good meditator, more invested in your spiritual identity, more separate from others rather than more connected. If the intention is genuine liberation, actually wanting to see clearly, actually wanting to be free from the patterns that cause suffering, then the same practice does something completely different. You're not building up identity, you're seeing through it. You're not becoming special, you're becoming more ordinary in the best way, more human, more connected, more real. The challenging part about examining intention is that we're really good at lying to ourselves about our own motivations. You tell yourself you're helping someone because you care, but underneath you might be helping because you want them to owe you, or because you need to feel needed, or because you can't stand their discomfort. So you're actually helping yourself feel better. You tell yourself you're setting a boundary for healthy reasons, but underneath you might be pushing someone away from hatred or fear, trying to punish them while calling it self-care. You tell yourself you're working hard because you care about excellence, but underneath you might be trying to earn worth, to prove you're not worthless, to make up for some deep sense of not being enough. This is where honest self-examination becomes crucial, not to judge yourself, not to feel guilty, but to see clearly what's actually driving your actions so you can work with it. Here's how you check your own intentions in real time. Before you act, pause and feel what's in your body. Is there tightness, grasping, a desperate quality? That's usually ego-driven intention, needing something, trying to get something, protecting something. Is there harshness, aggression, a pushing away quality? That's usually hatred or aversion driving the action, even if the action looks positive on the surface. Is there fog, confusion, that floaty autopilot quality? That's usually unconscious pattern, old conditioning, doing something because you always do, without knowing why. Or is there clarity, openness, a quality of genuine care, even if there's also discomfort? That's usually wholesome intention, acting from understanding rather than confusion, from care rather than fear. After you act, notice what's in your mind. Do you immediately need recognition for what you did? Do you need the person to respond in a certain way? Do you feel resentful if no one notices? That tells you the intention had ego in it, had need for validation. Or do you feel clear and complete regardless of response? Do you feel like you did what was yours to do, and the results aren't your concern? That tells you the intention was cleaner, less contaminated with need. The Buddha wasn't teaching you to become perfect or to only act from completely pure intentions. He was teaching you to see clearly what you're actually doing, because you can't work with what you can't see. When you notice, oh, I'm helping this person, but actually, I want them to owe me, that's not something to feel guilty about. It's just information. Now you can work with it, can make the choice to help anyway, while being aware of the mixed motivation, can gradually purify the intention over time. When you notice, I'm meditating, but actually, I'm trying to become special, that's valuable seeing. Now you can adjust, can bring the intention back to genuine practice rather than ego building. This is how intention transforms over time, not through forcing yourself to have pure motivation, but through seeing clearly what's actually present and working with it honestly. Maybe you start volunteering partly for resume building and partly from genuine care. That's fine, but as you practice and pay attention, you notice when the resume building motivation is active and when the genuine care is active. Over time, with awareness, the genuine care naturally becomes stronger because it feels better, it's more aligned with truth, it creates less suffering in you. Maybe you start meditating partly to become impressive, and partly from genuine curiosity about truth. As you practice honestly examining your intentions, you see more and more clearly how the ego-driven part creates suffering, the comparison, the need for validation, the disappointment when you're not progressing fast enough. And you see how the genuine curiosity part feels lighter, clearer, more sustainable. Gradually, the genuine motivation grows stronger, not because you're forcing it, but because you're seeing clearly what each kind of motivation creates. This is the path the Buddha taught, not becoming perfect, not having only pure intentions immediately, but developing the honesty to see what's actually driving you and the wisdom to work with it skillfully. Same action can be done from greed or generosity. Same boundary can be set from hatred or wisdom. Same meditation can be done from ego or genuine aspiration. The external form tells you almost nothing. The intention is what shapes who you're becoming. So when you're about to act, when you're about to help someone, make a decision, speak, stay silent, give something, refuse something, pause for just a moment and check what you're actually feeling underneath the action. Not to judge it, not to only act when intention is perfectly pure, but to see clearly what's driving you, so you're not unconscious, so you're actually working with reality, rather than being swept along by unconscious patterns. And over time, with this kind of honest self-examination, your intentions naturally become cleaner, not because you're forcing them to be, but because you're seeing clearly what creates suffering and what creates freedom, and you're choosing freedom more and more often. That's the transformation the Buddha taught, not instant perfection, not superhuman purity, but gradual clarification through honest seeing, of what's actually present in your own heart and mind. And that honesty, that ability to admit what really drives you without judgment, to see clearly what's present without denial, that's what makes transformation possible. There was a prince named Mahajanaka whose ship went down in a storm far from land. The wooden vessel carrying him home to claim his rightful throne splintered and sank, taking everyone aboard into the depths, except for him. He found himself alone in the vast ocean, with no land visible in any direction, no other survivors, no debris to cling to. Just endless water and the terrible knowledge that he would die here unless he could somehow reach shore. So he began to swim, not with any certainty that land existed within reach, not knowing which direction might be right, not having any guarantee that his effort would lead to survival. But swimming was the only action available to him, so he swam. He swam through the first day as the sun beat down on him, his throat parching with thirst, even surrounded by undrinkable salt water. He swam through the first night in complete darkness, not knowing if he was even moving in a consistent direction or just going in circles. The second day brought exhaustion deeper than any he'd known. His arms felt like lead, his legs barely moved, his vision blurred with fatigue and salt. But he kept swimming. The third day he started hallucinating, seeing islands that weren't there, hearing voices in the wind over the waves. His body was shutting down from dehydration and exhaustion, but still, he swam. By the fourth day, he'd entered a strange state beyond ordinary consciousness. His body was moving, but he wasn't directing it anymore. Something deeper than his conscious mind had taken over, keeping the rhythm of swimming going, even as his awareness drifted. The fifth day, the sixth day, time lost meaning. There was only the motion of swimming, the endless water, the continuation of effort, even though hope had long since disappeared. On the seventh day, a goddess named Manimakala, who lived in the ocean, happened to pass by. She saw this man still swimming after 7 days in the open sea, still making the movements even though his body was nearly finished, still persisting even though there was no rational reason to believe it would matter. She appeared before him and asked, "Prince, you have been swimming for 7 days without seeing land. You don't know if land exists anywhere near you. You don't know if you're swimming in the right direction. You're exhausted beyond measure. Why do you keep swimming?" And he answered, "Because swimming is what I can do. I cannot control whether land is near. I cannot guarantee I'll survive. I cannot force the ocean to deliver me to shore. But I can swim, so I swim." She was so moved by this answer, by the combination of maximum effort, without attachment to results, by the wisdom of doing everything possible, while accepting that outcomes weren't in his control, that she carried him to shore herself. When the Buddha told this story centuries later, He pointed to what made Prince Mahajanaka's approach wise, rather than just stubborn. The prince gave absolutely everything he had. He didn't hold back effort, didn't swim at 50% while waiting to see if it would work. He gave complete effort, as if his life depended on it, which it did. But he also wasn't attached to the outcome. He didn't torture himself with, "Why isn't this working?" Didn't waste energy on resentment that land wasn't appearing. Didn't fall into despair about whether his effort mattered. He simply did what he could do and let go of what he couldn't control. This combination, maximum effort plus complete letting go, that's what wisdom looks like in action. Think about something you're working toward right now that isn't happening on your timeline. Maybe you're searching for work, sending out applications, going to interviews, doing everything you know how to do, and nothing's coming through. You can keep making the effort while also not attaching your worth or peace to getting hired immediately. Or maybe you're working on a creative project that feels stuck. You show up every day. You do the work, but the breakthrough you're hoping for isn't arriving. You can keep working, keep showing up, while also trusting that creative work has its own timing that you don't fully control. Or maybe you're trying to heal from an illness or injury, doing everything your doctors recommend, and recovery is slower than you want. You can keep doing what supports healing while also accepting that you can't force your body to heal faster than it's capable of healing. The mistake most people make is doing one without the other. Some people give maximum effort, but with such desperate attachment to outcomes that they torture themselves when results don't come immediately. They're swimming frantically while constantly looking up to see if land has appeared yet, exhausting themselves with anxiety about whether their effort is working. Other people let go of attachment to outcomes, but without giving genuine effort first. They tell themselves they're trusting the process, while actually just not doing the work, not taking the actions available to them, waiting passively for something to happen. Prince Mahajanaka did both. He swam with everything he had, and he let go of whether swimming would save him. Here's how you know the difference in your own life. Are you doing absolutely everything that's actually in your power to do? Not everything you wish you could do, but everything you genuinely can do with the resources and understanding and capacity you currently have? If yes, and results still aren't appearing on your timeline, then the wisdom is to keep doing your part while releasing the demand that it produce specific outcomes immediately. If you're holding back effort or not actually doing what you know you could be doing, then the wisdom is to give more genuine effort before talking about trust and letting go. The prince didn't swim lazily while telling himself to trust the goddess. He swam for 7 days with maximum effort, doing absolutely everything in his power, and simultaneously held it all lightly enough that he could keep going without knowing if it would work. Think about the job search example. Giving maximum effort looks like updating your resume thoughtfully, researching companies and tailoring applications, reaching out to contacts, improving relevant skills, showing up fully in interviews. Letting go looks like, after you've done all that, releasing the demand that you get hired this week, not attaching your worth to whether you get the job, staying grounded even when you get rejected, trusting that the right situation will emerge when conditions align. You do both. You don't skip the effort part and call it trust. You don't do the effort part while destroying yourself with anxiety about outcomes. You swim with everything you have, and you let go of controlling when you reach shore. Or the relationship example. Maybe you're trying to repair a relationship that's been damaged. Maximum effort looks like being honest about your part in problems, actually changing behaviors that need changing, showing up consistently, listening genuinely, doing the work on yourself that's needed. Letting go looks like, after you've done all that, accepting that you can't force the other person to heal on your timeline, not attaching your peace to whether they respond how you want, staying open without demanding specific outcomes. You can't skip the effort. You can't damage a relationship through your behavior and then just trust the process without actually changing anything. But you also can't do the work while constantly demanding that the other person respond immediately, trying to control their healing, measuring every day whether your effort is working yet. The wisdom is giving everything you genuinely can give, while simultaneously accepting that you don't control all the factors that determine outcomes. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught that things arise based on countless conditions coming together, not just on your effort alone. The prince could swim, but he couldn't control ocean currents, couldn't control whether land was near, couldn't control whether a goddess happened to be passing by. His effort was one condition among many, essential, but not sufficient on its own. Your effort in job searching is one condition, but so are economic factors, other candidates, timing, whether the position actually needs to be filled. You can't control all those conditions, so you do what you can control and let go of the rest. Your effort in healing a relationship is one condition, but so are the other person's readiness, their own healing process, timing, external circumstances. You do your genuine part and accept that you're not the only factor determining outcomes. Your effort in creative work is one condition, but so are inspiration, timing, whether you've developed the skills needed, whether the work needs more time to develop beneath the surface. You show up and work, and also trust that creative emergence has its own timing. This doesn't mean you're passive or that effort doesn't matter. The prince's swimming absolutely mattered. If he'd just floated waiting to be rescued, he would have drowned. But his swimming alone wasn't sufficient. It was necessary, but not sufficient, which is true of almost everything important in life. The peace comes from doing your part completely and then releasing the demand that your part alone should be enough to force the outcome you want. Here's how this shows up in daily practice. You have a difficult conversation you need to have. You prepare thoughtfully. You speak honestly and kindly. You listen genuinely. That's your effort, given completely. Then you let go of whether the other person hears you the way you hope, whether they change their perspective, whether the conversation resolves everything. You have a presentation at work that matters. You prepare thoroughly. You show up and deliver it as well as you possibly can. That's your effort, given completely. Then you let go of whether people love it, whether it leads to promotion, whether it produces the specific outcomes you're hoping for. You're working on your health, eating well, exercising, sleeping enough, managing stress. That's your effort, given completely. Then you let go of whether your body responds exactly on your timeline, whether you achieve perfect health, whether the changes show up as fast as you want. Prince Mahajanaka swam for 7 days without knowing if there was shore, without knowing if his direction was right, without knowing if his effort would matter. But he swam anyway because swimming was what he could do, and he did it completely while accepting that survival wasn't guaranteed. You don't know what conditions need to come together for what you're working toward. You don't know the timing, don't know all the factors involved, don't know if your effort alone will be enough. What you can know is whether you're doing your part, whether you're swimming with everything you have, whether you're giving genuine effort to what's actually in your control. And what you can practice is letting go of demanding that your effort alone control all outcomes, accepting that you're participating in a process much larger than just your will. That trust isn't naive hope or passive waiting. It's wisdom that sees clearly. I will give everything I can give, and I will not torture myself with attachment to controlling what I cannot control. Swim with everything you have. Let go of when you'll reach shore. That's the path Prince Mahajanaka showed. Maximum effort, paired with complete trust, doing everything possible while knowing you don't control everything. The Buddha was teaching a group of monks about a practice he'd found beneficial, eating just 1 meal per day during the middle part of the day, then fasting until the next morning. He explained that this practice brought clarity to the mind, lightness to the body, and helped develop discipline without the heaviness that comes from eating late into the evening. It wasn't a rule or commandment. He was simply sharing what he'd discovered through his own experience about how eating patterns affected practice. Most of the monks listened with interest and said they would try this approach, recognizing it as reasonable guidance from someone whose wisdom they trusted. But there was a group of monks led by 2 men named Assaji and Punabasu who responded very differently. They looked at each other Then one of them spoke up. "We're comfortable eating whenever we want. We don't see any reason to change that. This practice might work for some people, but we're fine with our current approach." The other monks were shocked by this dismissive response to the Buddha's teaching. Here was guidance from the awakened one about a practice that supported clarity and discipline, and these monks were basically saying, "No thanks, we prefer comfort." The Buddha, however, didn't get angry or criticize them. Instead, he used their response as an opportunity to teach something much deeper than just about eating habits. He taught about what the middle way actually means in practice. "I don't say that wisdom comes all at once," the Buddha told them. "I don't say that someone should immediately adopt every practice perfectly from the beginning. Rather, wisdom develops through gradual training, gradual action, gradual practice." He then described 7 different types of practitioners, ranging from those who achieve complete liberation in this very life to those who make steady progress over longer periods of time. The point wasn't that everyone should be at the highest level immediately. The point was that practice develops gradually, according to each person's capacity and circumstances. But, and this was the crucial part of his teaching, gradual doesn't mean never. And gradual doesn't mean indulging in comfort whenever practice asks something of you. The Asaji and Punabasu group weren't practicing the middle way by refusing to try eating 1 meal per day. They were using "we're comfortable with our current habits" as an excuse to avoid any practice that felt challenging or unfamiliar. They were choosing comfort over growth, indulgence over discipline, staying exactly where they were, over any kind of development. That's not the middle way. That's just staying stuck while calling it wisdom. But the Buddha also made clear that the opposite extreme wasn't wisdom either. If someone tried to immediately adopt every advanced practice without any gradual development, they'd burn out, become rigid, or damage themselves like Mahapala, who lost his eyesight from excessive practice. The middle way is something more subtle than just don't do too much or too little. It's understanding that practice develops in stages, that you work with where you actually are rather than where you think you should be, and that gradual means steady growth, not permanent avoidance of anything challenging. Think about your own life and practice right now. Maybe you're interested in meditation, but you tell yourself you'll start when you have more time, when your life is less chaotic, when conditions are perfect. That's not the middle way of gradual practice. That's using gradual as an excuse for never starting. The middle way would be start with 5 minutes a day, because that's what you can actually sustain right now, and do those 5 minutes consistently, rather than waiting for the perfect moment to do 45 minutes. Or maybe you want to eat more healthfully, but you tell yourself you're being gradual by making no changes at all to your current habits. That's not gradual practice. That's staying stuck. The middle way would be change one meal, or change one habit, or change one choice at a time in a way you can actually maintain, and build from there rather than either attempting to transform everything overnight or attempting to change nothing. Or maybe you know you need to have a difficult conversation with someone, but you keep postponing it, telling yourself you're waiting for the right time, being patient, not forcing things. If you're genuinely preparing yourself, developing the clarity and skill to have the conversation well, that's gradual practice. If you're just avoiding discomfort indefinitely, that's not the middle way. That's fear disguised as patience. The Buddha's teaching at Kitagiri was precise about this distinction. Gradual training means you start where you are and move forward step by step. Not that you justify staying exactly where you are forever, because change feels uncomfortable. It means you don't overwhelm yourself by trying to be perfect immediately, but you also don't use the idea of gradual development as permission to never actually develop. Here's how you tell the difference in your own practice. If you're genuinely working at your edge, doing what you can actually sustain, while also challenging yourself appropriately, you'll feel some discomfort, but not overwhelming strain. You'll feel yourself growing, but not breaking. You'll have setbacks, but you'll keep returning to practice rather than abandoning it entirely. If you're using gradual as an excuse for avoidance, you'll keep postponing the same growth indefinitely. You'll always have reasons why now isn't the right time. You'll be comfortable, but not developing. And underneath the comfort, there will probably be a nagging awareness that you're avoiding rather than growing. But if you're pushing yourself beyond what's sustainable, you'll burn out, become rigid, or hurt yourself. You'll feel constant strain with no sense of natural growth. You'll abandon practice entirely when you finally exhaust yourself, or you'll become judgmental and harsh with yourself and others. The middle way navigates between these extremes with wisdom, not with rules. For one person at one time, eating one meal per day might be exactly right. It supports their practice, feels sustainable, creates the clarity they're looking for. For another person, at another time, eating one meal per day might be too extreme. They need more frequent nutrition for their body type, or activity level, or health situation, and forcing that practice would be harmful. For the Asaji Punabasu group, the issue wasn't whether eating one meal per day was right or wrong for them specifically. The issue was their attitude, their immediate rejection of anything that would challenge their current comfort, their unwillingness to even try or investigate. The Buddha was teaching that wisdom means working with your actual capacity while also genuinely working, not just settling into comfortable habits and calling it the middle way. This shows up everywhere in spiritual practice and in life. Someone wants to start exercising but tells themselves they'll start gradually by thinking about it for 6 months before taking any action. That's not gradual, that's avoidance. Gradual would be one short walk this week, building from there. Someone wants to start meditating, but tells themselves they need to read 5 more books about meditation first, need to find the perfect technique, need to understand everything before starting. That's not gradual preparation. That's using preparation as avoidance. Gradual would be sitting for 5 minutes today with whatever technique seems reasonable. Someone wants to change careers but tells themselves they're being wise and gradual by not taking any steps toward that change for years. Unless they're genuinely doing the slow work of building skills, or saving money, or preparing thoughtfully, that's not gradual, that's stuck. But the opposite is also true. Someone decides to start meditating and immediately tries to sit for 2 hours a day, becomes rigid about it, judges themselves harshly for every wandering thought, and burns out within a month. That's not the middle way either. That's forcing, and it creates the same problem in reverse. The Buddha's teaching was that wisdom develops through gradual training, gradual action, gradual practice. But gradual doesn't mean never, and it doesn't mean avoiding anything that challenges you. It means starting where you actually are, working with what you can actually sustain, and steadily developing, rather than either forcing yourself beyond sustainability or settling into permanent comfort. Here's the practical application. Choose one area of your life where you know something needs to develop, but you've been stuck. Maybe it's meditation practice, maybe it's health habits, maybe it's a difficult conversation, maybe it's a change you know you need to make. Ask yourself honestly, am I genuinely practicing gradual development, or am I using gradual as an excuse for avoidance? If you're genuinely working gradually, you'll see actual movement over time, even if it's slow. You'll feel challenged but not overwhelmed. You'll have evidence that you're developing, not just thinking about developing. If you're avoiding, you'll keep finding reasons why now isn't the right time, why you need more preparation, why your current comfort is actually wisdom. And years can pass with no actual development, while you keep telling yourself you're being gradual and wise. The middle way the Buddha taught at Kitagiri is this: you work with genuine reality, your actual capacity, your actual circumstances, your actual starting point, and from that reality, you take real steps forward, rather than either overwhelming yourself or staying permanently comfortable. It's patient with the process, while also actually engaging in the process, not just thinking about engaging in the process someday when conditions are perfect. And here's what makes this teaching hopeful, rather than demanding. The Buddha explicitly said that people develop at different rates through different paths, and that's completely natural and fine. You don't have to achieve everything immediately. You don't have to match anyone else's pace. You don't have to be perfect right now. Gradual really does mean gradual, steady development over time, according to your actual capacity. But you do have to actually practice, rather than just think about practicing. You do have to take real steps, even if they're small. You do have to work with where you are, rather than just hoping where you are will magically change without any effort from you. That's the middle way made concrete, not a rule about what practices to do or avoid, but a wisdom about how to work with your actual life in a way that creates real development without either forcing or avoiding. And the possibility that creates that you can actually do this, that steady practice over time really does transform things, that you don't need to be superhuman or perfect, just genuinely engaged. That's what makes the path sustainable. The stories we've explored today, the wealthy man who died empty, the monks who abandoned their sick brother, Mahapala who practiced until he went blind, Pingala who finally stopped fighting, the weaver's daughter who knew what she didn't know, Prince Mahajanaka who swam for 7 days, all of them point to the same truth. Practice isn't something separate from your life. It's not what you do on a meditation cushion before returning to regular life. It's how you wash dishes, how you drive to work, how you have difficult conversations, how you notice when you're out of balance and adjust without judgment. The integration of stillness and action isn't something you achieve after years of training. It's available right now, in this moment, in whatever you're doing. Washing dishes can be meditation if you're actually present while doing it. Commuting can be practice if you're aware of what you're feeling and thinking. Every conversation is training in being present with another human being. You don't need to become someone different to start practicing. You don't need perfect conditions or more time or a better situation. You start exactly where you are, with what you have in this moment. When you notice you're exhausted from endless doing, you can pause. When you notice you're withdrawing into stillness that disconnects you from life, you can engage. When you notice you're fighting reality, you can stop fighting. When you notice you're clinging to outcomes, you can let go while still doing your part. This isn't about perfection. It's about being present with what's actually here, over and over, beginning again in each moment. That's the practice. That's all it's ever been.